You conduct interviews all day long, especially when you meet new people. If you go to a party where you don't know anybody, you walk in, now you have a choice. You can go hide in the back and play with the cat, or you can not be weird and start talking to people. So you do this all the time. You don't realize how much a part of it is in your everyday life. So let's go ahead and look at how we are going to transform that everyday skill into something that we can use professionally. So all interviews have some steps. Planning is really important, right? So you want to decide what information you need and the best sources of your information, and then prepare for the conversation. Now, these two steps work when it's not a deadline event that happens. However, every time you prepare when you can, it helps you for those times where you're on a late breaking story and you're just on your way running to the story. You already know kind of what you're going to do when you get there because you've practiced planning in the past. People care about you speaking to them if you are show them that you're knowledgeable about what they're doing, that you care about what they're doing. So that helps your sources to speak more freely, to feel confident that you've spent time, that you care about the topic, right? So there's a lot of stuff you can find out ahead of time. The person's name, the title, the background of that person. Does that person have a personal website or a social media site that your subject has created himself or herself? You can get a lot of information there. I would make sure to double check with them, make sure that all the information is current. You can share that you've got that from their work site or their Twitter homepage. Is all this correct and updated? You want to check with them. Then you're going to decide which questions to ask, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the different types of questions. The key to preparation, though, is that you're not going to waste time asking about already established information that you can find elsewhere. Now, the types of questions you ask in an interview are also the types of questions that you might ask again in that party scenario where you walk through the door and you realize you don't know anybody. So you might find somebody there who looks like that person doesn't have a friend either and ask, what's your name? That's a closed-ended question. It's going to be a 1 or 2 word answer. You can ask them where they're from. Again, that's another one. And so maybe the person, you're in Louisiana, the person is from New York State, right? So then you want to find out, you're going to start to ask some open-ended questions. How did you get to Louisiana? What caused you to want to come here? Are you on vacation? Or do you live here? Are you a student? Now we can start to dig a little bit deeper and find out a little bit more about that person. Open-ended question allows for a more thoughtful answer from your subject. And so those would be like how or what or why. Sometimes questions that start like that will allow that person to give a personal answer to your question. A type of open-ended question might be a hypothetical question. You know, what would you think if the city council provided more money? Now, you might not always ask some of these questions, but it depends on the topic. But this is an option for you depending on who you're interviewing and what some of those subjects are that you need to find out about. Now, agree or disagree. Would you agree or disagree that the city council should provide money for this particular project? And why would you agree or disagree? And so that's going to help as well. Now, you also want to make sure that you understand what the person said. So you want to ask for more information, maybe a further explanation about what that person said. So that's digging a little bit deeper on each question. Personal questions, it depends on the subject. You know, you don't want to get super personal unless your interviewee opens the door for that. Sometimes you can ask the person, maybe you're in the office and there's some things in the office, pictures that are conversation pieces that you can ask about the person's family, or maybe you see a certain person pictured everywhere. How is that person important in his or her life? One of the chancellors at LSU in the past was a head of NASA, and he had a space shuttle chair in his office. So I remember walking in there, and we went through the closed-ended questions, but I was curious about that chair. So he spent a little bit of time explaining to me the chair was a lot bigger than I pictured a space shuttle chair should be. Now, your questions are going to follow kind of a funnel method, which goes from general to specific. So the red would be really general, closed-ended questions. Maybe you're starting from scratch. You don't really know your person. And you go all the way down to the very specific, pinpointed purple questions. And it really depends on the time that you have and how much prior information you already have. You might have to start at the blue or green level and work your way down. And you might even have to start at the purple. In fact, if you listen to a press conference, so for example, a presidential press conference, those reporters have a chance usually to ask one question, if at all. So they have their one question, the one they don't want to leave without the answer to. And honestly, you need to know what those are, what your purple questions are. You don't want to leave that place without having those questions answered. Here are a few tips to remember when interviewing, right? Now, this seems really simple, but to listen to the answers. And the reason I put this here, because sometimes I can be so involved in a conversation, ask a question, and I'm thinking about the next question or the previous answer, and I'm not actually listening to what the person says. So those of you who have trouble, you're all over the place in your mind and you're involved in the conversation, and it's exciting to the point where we're not really listening to what the person's telling us in that moment. We've got to focus and listen to the answers so that we can make sure that we understand what the person is trying to tell us. We might have to repeat the answer to the subject. So, in other words, you're saying, Mr. Smith, that this is the way this program works. Repeat it to the person to make sure that you understand. When you have a really good direct quote from your person, you're going to take the time to write that down verbatim, word for word. And you want to put quotation marks in your notes. You can ask your person, maybe you realize this is a good direct quote. And again, the more you interview people, the minute that person starts to talk, you know this is going to be a good direct quote. Trust me on that. It's going to happen to you, right? And so you want to stop what you're doing and take the time to write it down word for word. Now, we're going to talk about using recording devices, but my philosophy is that you don't depend on those. Pretend you don't have it and write everything down. And I can say to my person, would you mind stopping for just a minute? I want to make sure that I get this statement down. Or you can listen to the person talk, take your time to write the statement down, and then go back and ask the person to repeat some of those things that might have been discussed while you were writing down that direct quote. One thing that's really helpful is you're not expected to be an expert, right? And so that's why you're interviewing the person who does know about the topic. People like to talk about themselves. When was the last time someone really asked you your opinion about a matter or to describe that hobby that you're passionate about? That doesn't happen too often. So it's quite an honor for you to be discussing that with that person. So people don't mind it. But at the same time, you want to honor your person's time, right? And you want to be well prepared for the interview. Now let's talk a little bit about professionalism, right? Because you're a professional. You're representing your organization or even just yourself. So you want to set the tone of the interview. And by that, I mean you tell people up front who you are and what you're doing. So my name is Roxanne Dill. I work for the Daily Reveille, and I'm doing a story on widgets. And I heard that you invented a widget that's quite unique. Would you mind if we spent about 15 or 20 minutes and you can explain to me about your invention, right? Or you tell your person your name, that you're doing a story for your media writing class, and that you would like to talk to them for a certain amount of time. So set up a time period so the person knows what to expect. That allows you to honor your individual's time, make sure that you don't waste time, and it keeps you on track so that you don't stay longer than you said you would. Now, you can use a recording device with permission. In the state of Louisiana, only one person has to know about the recording device. But I would say it's unethical for you to go in there with a recording device and you don't tell your person. So if you have an iPhone, for example, the voice memo app is great. It really takes really clear recordings of your encounter with your person, and you can use that. But you want to let your person know what you're doing. I'm using my voice memo app to record our conversation. I want to make sure that I get all of the statements down correctly. I don't want to make any mistakes. Usually, when you tell people that, they're fine with that. If I am recording you, say we're talking on the phone and it's a phone interview, I'm going to tell people everything. I'm going to say, listen, I'm in my office. I'm the only one here. You're going to hear some noise. I'm typing on my computer while we talk. I have my phone on recording the conversation. Is that okay with you? And you let people know exactly what's going on, and they're going to feel much more confident in that time that you have with them together. Now, after your interview, you're going to go over and transcribe your notes. In fact, there is another presentation in this module that's very short, but it kind of reviews what you want to do when you create a notes transcription. What do you do? What does that look like? Now, you don't want to overthink this. It's pretty simple, but it's a way for you to organize your information that you've just taken by notes. One of the reasons that you want to use a pen and pad if you use a recording device is it takes a long time to go through a recording and to figure out what you've got in there. If you write down your notes and say the person says something super interesting at 3 minutes and 10 seconds, make a note on your written notes to go back to that time spot on your recording, and it's going to save you a ton of time. If all you do is record and you don't take notes, you are going to be going through this. It's going to take you 5 times longer than you really want to, and that's not what you want to do here. You don't often have that kind of time when you're on deadline. So after your notes, you want to go someplace, budget this in your time, and you're going to write down, you're going to type out what you've got in your notebook. You're going to type out your direct quotes word for word, put quotation marks around them. You can omit unnecessary information. However, I wouldn't throw any of my notes away until I'm finished, just to make sure that I don't need to go back and find that. But this, you can double space, single space. You can use bullet points for your paraphrased information. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the presentation on how to transcribe your notes. And so you want to look at that. It's going to give you a little bit of confidence. Don't overthink this. It's not really hard. This is a part of the process, too, where you find out, do I need to talk to somebody else? Or maybe I need to call my person back. I forgot to ask a question. So the reason this works so well if you do it ASAP after the interview is you can call that person soon as well. That interview's fresh in your person's mind, it's fresh in your mind, and you're more likely to get some good information there. Now, before you leave your interview, there's some things that you want to do, right? You want to establish an open line in case you have more questions, right? So I would say, may I contact you again if I have additional questions? And how would you prefer to be contacted? Is it by email? Is it telephone? Is it in person? You want to find out how you can get in touch with that person as soon as possible. And I might give them a deadline. I might say, listen, I'm going to be working on the story in the next day or two. So I'll probably call you back in the next day or two if I have another question. Also, I think that having this contact information is helpful because I think it's a good idea after the interview to thank your person for spending that time with you. Thank them when you leave, but you can always send them another note and thank them as well too. That's an option. Now, you want to not leave till you get the person's name spelled right. So what is the best source for spelling a person's name? And I hope you said the person, because that's absolutely it. If you get the name from a social media site, a website, you want to double check it. And I tell you, I made zeros in this category when I was in college. But it built within me a healthy paranoia to the point where one of the first assignments I had, I went to a citywide political event, and there was a panel of women, and they all had normal names. like Mary Smith, Jane Jones. And my old self would have just assumed their names were spelled the way I thought they were. But because I was paranoid, I asked each one how to spell her name. And each woman, every single one, had the most unusual spelling for a normal name I've ever seen. That was a huge lesson in me. I never take that for granted. You want to make sure that you've got all your ID info for your subjects, because you're going to have to identify them in different ways as you write your story, right? So if it's an official person, you want his or her title. If that person's non-official, then maybe it's the hometown. Sometimes the age, really depends on the story, job description, or something like that. I'm going to share with you 3 really good questions you should always have in your back pocket. So, what advice would you give someone? Now, this works for a feature story. Maybe I'm talking about my guy with widgets, and I'd say, what advice would you give someone who wanted to invent a widget or had an invention in the back of his or her mind to try? What advice? If it's somebody who has the job, the hobby, and again, it depends on the type of story that you're doing, you can get some really good answers here. And for your feature story, this is the question you absolutely want to ask. Often this answer is one of those great direct quotes that you can even use at the end of your story, right? You want to also ask people, is there anything that you'd like to add that we didn't talk about? And this could also give you some of your best quotes. And you can maybe use this one toward the end of the story. People are often giving you information in these categories where they're thinking ahead or talking about a lesson they learned. Someone who's done a job or a hobby has learned some things the hard way, and so has some good advice in retrospect to give you. Also, you want to ask them if there's anything that they didn't talk about, because some people are super literal. They will only answer the question that you ask. So maybe in the process, the person thought, we need to talk about this, or she hasn't asked me about this. So this opens a door now and gives them a chance to give you some information. You also want to share your contact information with people, because sometimes that person may think of something. Again, remember, people are literal, so maybe that doesn't come to mind at this point, but you give them permission now. You open the door for them to share with you whatever it is they want. And sometimes I'm telling you, you'd be surprised at the answers to these questions. You find out that you might have missed the story altogether, and now this person's going to share with you. So I would share my contact information, tell them your deadline, say, in the next couple days, if you think of something that you think is important or that we missed or that you want to clarify, please don't hesitate to contact me. Then when you tell them that, make sure you actually answer the phone, right? Now, why am I showing this right to you? Okay, so your assignment now is to do your friend interview and written story. So you're going to see the instructions called Keep It G-Rated. I have them printed out for you in a document, but I also have a short PowerPoint that will walk you through the steps as well. So you can look at both of those. You can pick the one that you like, and it's going to tell you exactly what to do. This is my absolute favorite assignment of all. It's a really short assignment, but it's a good practice run for your final feature. You'll be much more confident doing your final feature, and I know you're going to enjoy doing this friend story.